As modifiers that can alter the flow of combat, status effects have been used over the years to grant a variety of enhancements and debilitating ailments, serving to both empower and keep players on their toes. Simply put, status effects have become an essential part of many winning strategies, but they have also been what has led to some crushing and unexpected defeats. Classic examples have to be the likes of Protect, Poison, and Confuse, and these have all been represented throughout the Final Fantasy franchise over the years. Alongside these, less common status effects like Mini, Toad, and Zombie have also cropped up on a semi-regular basis to add an extra dimension that ensured battles stayed fresh. But beyond these status effects, which have to be considered staples, there also exists a subset of less common statuses that went the extra mile. And it was these statuses where you could really tell that the developers went a bit wild with regards to their concepts. Now, even though many of these status effects would only appear in one or two selected entries across the franchise, they still had that distinct Final Fantasy flair. And it's those statuses that we're going to focus on in today's video, namely the wonderful, strange, and most importantly, the weird and obscure. So, with our usual caveat that we'll only be featuring one status effect per title, we're going to kick things off with an innovative status effect that appeared in Final Fantasy V. First though, we'd like to talk about an interesting collaboration we've been working on with Lost in Cult. Over the past 2 years, Lost in Cult have gained a reputation for creating premium video game journals called Lock-On. To date, 5 separate journals have been produced, and they feature words from some of the video game industry's finest minds. Volume 5, for example, had an in-depth exploration of both Scorn and The Last of Us. Volume 6 will have a strong focus on Final Fantasy, and we've been working with Lost in Cult to create something quite special. Alongside interviews from Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yoshitaka Amano, and Noboru Uematsu, thoughtful analysis and touching personal reflections will be provided by the likes of Ben Starr, Holly Bennett, Lucy James, and Tim Gettys. I will also be writing a piece about Final Fantasy II, no less. For those who are interested in games beyond Final Fantasy, there will also be a heavy focus on Zelda, with over 70 pages of dedicated content and an interview with Matt Mercer. The premium and deluxe editions will be limited to 2,000 and 500 units respectively, and these will be of particular interest to many of us as they feature a stunning cover designed by Amano. Crowdfunding is already underway, so to be sure you don't miss out, click the link in the description below. And with that, on with the video. Anyone who has played a Final Fantasy game knows that status effects designed to lower specific stats are some of the most annoying. Blind and Slow are perhaps the most common examples of this type of debuff, as they can debilitate party members in their own particular way. But even though they are much less common, there are also status effects that can have an adverse effect on every stat, and when they land, they can severely affect a character's ability to have a positive impact on the ensuing battle. Perhaps the most painful example of this comes via the Old status, which could be found in Final Fantasy V. Aging its victim, what made Old unique was that instead of applying a general debuff to a character's stats, it instead reduced their stats progressively over the course of the battle. Old also hit players and monsters differently. For Bartz and the party, Old lowered every stat, but when used on enemies, only speed and overall level would be affected. But that wasn't even the worst part. Old could be cured in battle through the use of Asuna, or if the afflicted character was KO'd. But even if cured, any loss of stat points already incurred to that point were not recovered. The affected party member would stay at the age they regressed to until the end of the fight, making difficult situations much more difficult if the party was unprepared. To make matters worse, there were limited opportunities to gain resistance to Old through equipped gear, making the status a tough one to avoid when encountered. Even if precautions were taken, it would all be for naught if monsters used level 2 Old ability, as this spell ignored all resistances and immunities to Old and hit any target whose level equaled a multiple of 2. It meant Old was an interesting concept, but even though it did have a cameo in Final Fantasy XIV, we're sure many were happy that it has not become a regular status effect across the rest of the franchise. Now, negative status effects are often designed to have an effect on what decisions are made both in and out of combat, but few directly force those decisions. They're often left to the player to remedy or deal with as they see fit, and in this way, negative effects can have an extra layer of complication to battle strategy, which in turn can make combat unpredictable. But when there's no choice as to the next action, such as in Final Fantasy X-2 with the Itchy status, things can go a little bit more off script. Itchy was one of the rarest status effects in Final Fantasy X-2, and it was pretty self-explanatory. It made its victims, well, itchy. But those who were affected were left unable to act, unless they either changed their equipped dress sphere or simply fled the battle. Outside of forcing a specific action, Itchy had no other adverse effects, and was easily cured by taking either one of the two aforementioned options. If you didn't want to take either of those options though, Itchy could be cured by using Esuna, Holy Water, or a Remedy, and this made it more of an annoyance than anything else. It's also clear that Itchy was tailor-made for X-2's battle system, as it focused on constantly switching dress spheres in order to gain an advantage in combat. When Itchy had the potential to cause real problems though, was when it forced any of the player characters to switch to a dress sphere that was underdeveloped or unsuited to the task at hand. This could in turn leave the party at a disadvantage, causing some tense moments as strategies needed to be adjusted on the fly. Itchy could also be prevented using the Itch-Proof auto ability, but often it was easiest just to do what Itchy wanted and switch dress spheres, as the status really didn't appear that often enough to warrant preemptive measures. It's worth noting though that Itchy also had a twin status effect called Curse. This status has also appeared across the franchise in a variety of forms, but in X-2, Curse specifically prohibited the switching of dress spheres, effectively making it the opposite of Itchy. Most beneficial status effects augment a character's stats or abilities to make them more effective in combat by giving them a boost. Common examples like Haste or Protect raise speed and physical defense, respectively, allowing the recipients to charge into battle much more prepared. That being said, not every beneficial status effect has needed to raise a character's combat capabilities in order to be helpful, and some even went a step further and helped a character avoid combat altogether. In Final Fantasy IV, Edward's signature ability granted one such status on the Spoony Bard, and that status was Hide. Being bestowed via a selectable command each turn, the Hide status would temporarily remove Edward from combat and save him from taking any damage. What's more, the ability would activate automatically if Edward's health dropped too low, serving to keep him alive when things got a little messy. In the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV, if the player was to give Edward 2 augments prior to his leaving the party, they would receive the Hide augment, which granted any character the ability to use Hide. This version of the ability differed from the original though, as it still allowed characters who were hidden to use the aim and throw commands while off-screen. But as in its first appearance, generally the only thing you could do when hidden was to re-reveal themselves and rejoin the battle. Hide would go on to appear in a few other Final Fantasy games, most notably appearing in Final Fantasy V, where it featured as a level 1 ability for the Bard job. It also appeared in both MMOs, where it acted as a way for sneaky classes like thieves and rogues to avoid enemies outside of combat. Over the years, most status effects have been quite literally named. Poison, poisons. Blind, blinds, and silence, silences. While this naming convention holds quite true across the majority of games, on the odd occasion there have been statuses where the name doesn't really do much to explain what it actually does. And of these types of statuses, few are as obscure as Final Fantasy II's Aura. This was a beneficial status bestowed by the black magic spell of the same name, but Aura was unlike any other buff in the game. This was because rather than boosting a specific stat or providing some sort of defensive enhancement, Aura instead boosted the target weapon's strength against specific monster families. This in itself was quite obscure, but it also had a very particular use case, in that the number of monster families the buff would be beneficial against would increase depending on the number of times Aura was successfully cast on the target. This meant that in order for the spell to be useful, you'd have to successfully cast Aura multiple times in a row on the same character, and also know how many successful casts were needed for the spell to be useful against the intended monster family. For example, it would need to be cast 4 times to deal extra damage to giants, and 6 times to deal extra damage to dragons. Imperfect accuracy also made Aura a very difficult status effect to take advantage of in the heat of battle. As a result, it was often recommended to just use Berserk to boost attack instead, as Berserk would raise its target's attack stat regardless, making it a much more versatile option. Aura would go on to appear in a few other games though, usually as a straightforward stat boosting ability, but its inclusion in Final Fantasy VIII was perhaps the most noticeable. In that game, Aura was used to increase the chance of the affected character gaining access to a limit break. Transformation spells like Minnie and Toad have been part of Final Fantasy ever since Final Fantasy II. They would often be caused by the use of status-specific spells or monster abilities, and when applied, they would dramatically influence battle capabilities and visual appearance, something that was taken to the extreme in more recent times with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Alongside these two venerable iterations, the franchise has also had numerous variants, such as Pig and Imp. But with the introduction of Final Fantasy Tactics, a new, more foul transformation spell was added alongside the series staples. The chicken status played in with Tactics' Faith and Bravery system. It would be afflicted on any unit that saw its Bravery stat fall below 10, and should this condition be met, the stricken unit would then literally turn into a chicken, run away to the corner of the map each turn, and take increased damage from incoming attacks. To lower a unit's bravery this low, abilities such as the Orator's Intimidate or the Templar's appropriately named Chicken could be utilised, as these abilities lowered in-battle bravery by a substantial amount on a successful hit. Now, while Chicken was a temporary effect that didn't persist past a battle's end, the bravery stat itself was a running number that persisted between fights, with one permanent stat point being lost or gained for every 4 lost or gained in battle. This was potentially disastrous, as a unit that had transformed into a chicken therefore also had a lasting hit to their overall bravery, which in turn affected how often their reaction abilities would trigger and could even cause them to leave the player's party at the end of a fight if it was too low. Raising the bravery of a unit who had transformed into a chicken was the only way to treat the status, and this could be done through the use of abilities such as Steal, also known as Cheer Up or Praise. Against enemies, Chicken functioned the same way, but as some enemies carried immunity to the transformation aspect, it unfortunately wasn't possible to turn each and every adversary into a barnyard bird, much to the disappointment of many. Now, in MMOs, how one presents and outfits their avatar is often as important as what role they play or how good the gear actually is. For many, spending hours collecting and hunting for the right pieces to complete a desired outfit has become a core part of the experience. But grinding for gear was not the only way players could don a new look in MMOs, and that brings us back to status effects. Final Fantasy XI featured an innovative status effect called Costume. It was most commonly encountered during special in-game events, and when active, the player avatar would temporarily change appearance, taking on a variety of different forms. When affected by Costume, a character was only able to walk about and could not interact with anything or use any abilities. In addition, the effect was auto-limited to use in cities and was dispelled instantly if the player was to leave, although they could also dispel it manually if so desired. Overall, it meant Costume was intended as a benign effect meant to help players celebrate in-game festivities and show off a bit. But it's worth pointing out that even though this was the primary use, there are also some created, limited cases wherein the costume effect was turned into something far more dangerous. Certain monster families, such as the Poroko and vampire enemies, actually had abilities that could transform their targets into ghastly creatures through the costume status. Contrary to its celebratory version, this form of the status was not so easily dispelled, and sometimes even came with a charming effect, limiting an avatar's actions to just basic attacks and giving the player no control over their actions. In this regard, it's interesting that the developers were able to make the costume status effect multi-purpose, one part celebration and fun, and the other part quite the opposite. For our final entry, we'd like to shed light on a mysterious status effect that has appeared a few times throughout the franchise. However, its appearance in Final Fantasy XII is worth focusing on due to its uniqueness and obscurity. The disease status had already appeared in Final Fantasy IX, X-2, and XI prior to its inclusion in Final Fantasy XII, and it was sometimes known as Virus or Pointless. In Final Fantasy IX and X-2, disease manifested as a status which primarily prevented the character from earning experience and ability points at the end of a battle, effectively halting their growth until cured. But it was the Final Fantasy XI rendition of disease that paved the way for what would later be seen in Final Fantasy XII. It abandoned the growth stunting effect, instead inhibiting the regeneration of HP and MP through resting. And its stronger version, Plague, also caused its victim to lose MP and TP over time. For its part, the Final Fantasy XII disease status took this idea and ran with it, creating something truly unique with the franchise and living up to its gruesome in-game description of a body festering with illness. To begin, disease prohibited the use of all healing items and magics on an infected character, and how it did this was especially diabolical. It turned whatever numerical value an afflicted character's HP was into their maximum HP, effectively removing the ability to mitigate damage. To make things worse, when a diseased character did take damage, their health bar wouldn't drop, but their total HP would. Additionally, all attempts to find out what the character's true HP count was through the use of Libra would prove fruitless. When combined with the fact that many enemies then paired disease with the poison or sap statuses, it was possible that a character, or even the whole party's maximum HP, could drop to the value of 1, an effect that would persist indefinitely, even if the character was knocked out and revived. Disease would continue to be used throughout the series, with appearances in Final Fantasy XIV and Brave Exvius. But the Final Fantasy XII iteration was by far the most unique and debilitating. And with that, there were 7 of the most obscure status effects found across the Final Fantasy franchise. But were there any that you've encountered that you think were deserving a spot on this list? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to give us a like and subscribe for more content. Also, if you liked what you heard about our collaboration with Lost in Cold, click the link in the description below. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Adam Aguilara, Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Gaussian Dekujata, Gregory, Justin Dent, and Zukun TDK, who are super special Onion Knight supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.